Hello, I'm Giles Darling and I write novels, plays and non-fiction books. In this video I continue to show an example of how to create dozens of story ideas from a what-if moment. This follows the process outlined in my How to Create Story Ideas videos, which I include a link to below. So let's ask even more open-ended questions about voting reform. Question 4. Where is the story set? As with the previous question in one of my earlier videos, the setting of the story idea can be organised along a sliding scale from very political to not political at all. This will typically depend on the jobs of the story's main characters. For example, if the main characters are politicians, or if they work for politicians, for example as personal assistants, then the story is likely to be set in or around parliamentary or government buildings. Similarly, if the main characters are reporters or journalists, then the story could revolve around a television studio or a newspaper's offices. If the story idea focuses on reforming voting technology, then it could be set elsewhere, maybe over multiple locations. For example, a story about switching from a paper-based to an electronic-based voting system could be set both in a committee room where the decisions are made and in an office building where the new technology is developed and tested. Similarly, a story idea about constructing better polling booths could also be set in a factory. If the story idea focuses on espionage as democratic and undemocratic countries try to influence each other's voting systems, then it could also take place in dark corridors, shadowy meeting rooms, and illicit rendezvous. Away from the heart of politics, the story idea could be set in a typical town, village, or other local community. If the main characters are volunteers delivering political leaflets door to door, the story could be set on a street where each neighbour has different views and opinions about voting reform, some in favour of it and some against it. Alternatively, the story could revolve around a single family living in a single house. Does voting reform affect each of them differently? Maybe the parents, accustomed to the current situation, are against any reform, while the children, particularly if they are young adults maybe looking for work, could be in favour of anything that upturns the status quo. How will any disagreements develop? The story idea doesn't have to address the issue of voting reform or wider electoral reform head-on. Instead, it could tell the story obliquely by changing the location or time period. Or it could be told via an allegory, where, on the surface, the story idea seems to be about something else altogether. For example, the story idea could focus on voting reform in a school, maybe how the school's head student is elected. Or in a workplace like a factory or an office, such as how a shop steward is voted in. The rivalries and opinions will be localised and smaller, but the consequences could seem to be just as significant for those involved as nationwide voting reform could seem to be on wider society. Similarly, the story idea could be set in prehistoric times, with a tribe trying to find a better way to reach agreements than simple brute force or intimidation. Or it could be set on a spaceship far in the future, where occupants have to decide how to distribute a dwindling food supply fairly. Again, the rivalries and issues will be localised and small scale, but they can still resonate with the challenges that voting reform faces today. For an allegory, voting reform could be switched with some other issue, for example romance or mystery. Maybe the story's main characters are in a love triangle, with news reports about voting reform playing out in the background on the television. Alternatively, the main character could be a detective investigating the murder of a prominent politician who just happens to have been an advocate for voting reform. The primary focus can also be omitted altogether from an allegory, for example no mention of voting reform at all. However, this can be much harder to create and it risks many people failing to recognise the actual purpose of the story idea. Can you think of other settings for story ideas about voting reform? Do you have any good examples of voting reform allegories? Please leave your suggestions in this video's comments. Question 5. What triggers the demand for voting reform? Calls for voting reform have occurred regularly through history because no voting system can ever satisfy all voters and all politicians. Under normal circumstances, these calls are ignored and the status quo remains unchallenged. Therefore, for this to change, there needs to be some trigger event that brings voting reform to the forefront of societal consciousness. Without this, a story idea about voting reform could be dull or confusing. The trigger event can be political instability, such as the repeated failure of a current system to elect a new government. Or it can be political change, for example a new political party getting elected with a mandate to overturn a stale and out-of-date system. Alternatively, the trigger event could be caused by external forces, such as a coup d'etat or an invading army overthrowing the government. Or it could be some other emergency that changes the nation's priorities, such as a health epidemic or food shortage crisis. In these situations, a charismatic strongman figure could whip up people's feelings, prompting civil unrest and maybe even civil war. Under such circumstances, it's possible that elections could be temporarily suspended, which is an extreme type of voting reform. Not all story ideas about voting reform have to end on a positive note. On a smaller scale, voting reform could just be prompted by advances in technology, for example switching from a paper-based voting system to an electronic-based system. Or they could be prompted by gradual changes in society, such as an ageing population increasing the need for better postal voting systems. Can you think of other possible trigger events for story ideas about voting reform? Please leave your suggestions in this video's comments. Thank you for watching this video. No doubt you can think of more open-ended questions. Please add them to this video's comments. If they're particularly good, I might even use them myself. To see me create initial story ideas from these open-ended questions, please watch my next follow-up video. Please also check out the rest of my YouTube channel, especially where I discuss the various books that I've written. I hope my channel encourages you to buy my books and to read them if you haven't already done so. Finally, please feel free to leave comments below and to like and subscribe this video and my YouTube channel. Cheerio for now.